Okay, good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. This morning, I'd like to discuss something that we're all pretty much familiar with, and that is the whole practice of Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos, also on Yom Tov. Where does it come from? What are the special halachos relating to Lechem Mishnah? To give us some background to this mitzvah that we do every week, and perhaps learn a few new things about it. The whole concept of Lechem Mishnah is based on the manna that fell, and it describes what happened on Friday. They went out to gather the manna, the man, every day of the week, and on Friday they had a double portion because they were not to go out and collect it on Shabbos. And the Torah says, "Vayehi bayom hashishi, loktu lechem mishnah." They gathered a double amount. And based on this, the Gemara derives the obligation of having two challah rolls, or two challahs actually, a lechem mishnah. And keep in mind, whenever the halacha is talking about lechem, this was before bread slicing machines were invented. So when they baked a loaf of bread, they baked an entire loaf, and they sliced whatever they needed when they needed it. So when you talk about lechem, it's not sliced bread, it's a loaf of bread, unsliced.
That they had in the standard last week.
Yeah, the big challah, yeah.
38 feet or something.
37, yeah. They actually baked another one even bigger than that, but they couldn't fit it in the truck. Whatever. But the Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Yud Zayin, says, Tana Rabbanan, Kama Seudos Chayev Adam Lechol B'Shabbos. So, in addition to learning the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah from being called Lechem Mishnah, the Mun, it also relates to how many meals you're required to have on Shabbos. And the Gemara says 3. Rav Churka Omer Arba, he says 4. Okay, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Ushneya Mikra Echad, they come from the same pasuk. Vayomer Moshe, and we're talking about the mun. And they were given enough mun to last for the day. And Moshe says to them, eat it, because tomorrow you'll have more. Don't leave anything over. And he says this for Vayomer Moshe, Ichluhu hayom, ki Shabbos hayom, Lashem, hayom lo tze'enu basadim. He talks about the extra mun that you have for Shabbos. You're not going to go out. You have enough. But he mentions hayom 3 times. So given the ichluhu hayom, eat the mun today. So hayom, 3 times, you have to have at least 3 meals on Shabbos. And each of those meals, theoretically, should have lechem mishnah. And we'll talk about the difference between Friday night, Shabbos, and Shalosh Seudos in a moment. Okay, now, the discussion in Maseches Brachos has a different concept altogether. The Sugya talks about how do you cut bread. There's actually a section in the Shulchan Aruch called Hilchos B'tzias Hapas. How do you slice the loaf? How do you slice that? It's interesting in terms of Shabbos. It's a practical issue. You know, when you slice the challah, how should you slice it? And it's a 3-way machlokas actually, because what is the best baked part of the challah? Is it on top? Is it on the bottom, which is well done? And the consensus seems to be cut the corner piece, because the corner piece has both of them. It has the top and the bottom, and the end. It's all well done together. And that's the best part of this, the best slice to have. But there are halachos of how to slice the challah. The nature of the mitzvah, it's a fantastic machlokas that I won't get into too many details about it. But the fact that the halacha appeals in Maseches Brachos, and it also appeals in Maseches Shabbos. So the question is, and this is the poskim debate this at great length, is Lechem Mishnah a mitzvah of Hilchos Brachos, or is it a discussion about Hilchos Sudas Shabbos? Does it enhance the way we make hamotzi on Shabbos? Or does it have to do with how many loaves you have to have? So is it a Shabbos halacha or is it a brachos halacha in terms of how we deal with Lechem Mishnah? The one exception, by the way, a fantastic exception, is Pesach. On Pesach, Yantif, you also have Lechem Mishnah, but when you break one of the two matzahs, then you're left with 1.5. So what happens to Lechem Mishnah with 1.5 matzahs? So the Rosh came up with the idea, so start to have 3 matzahs. And when you break it, you still have Lechem Mishnah. The truth is, the Rambam, the Vilna Gaon, of Soloveitchik, said, no, you only have 2. And you dafka make hamotzi on 1.5 because that's the kiyum of Lechem Oni. Bread of affliction, the poor man's bread. So that's a separate halacha for Pesach. But generally on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, you have 2 loaves or 2 challahs. Again, we follow the Rosh. We have 3 matzahs on Pesach, so you have Lechem Mishnah. But if the din is Lechem Oni on Pesach, then there are those who only start with 2. Separate discussion. Now, when you slice the challah on Shabbos, there is a halacha that you should slice it into very large pieces. So if you have a big challah, you can do that. And obviously the halacha is trying to indicate to us that we should have a large challah, so you could slice large pieces for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's Oneg Shabbos. And number 2, if you want to have the mitzvah properly, you should eat a full kazayas of that challah when you make hamotzi. Just like at the Seder, you have a kazayas of matzah. No different on Shabbos when you have a kazayas of challah. I know Stephen was very makpid on that. He wouldn't talk. He would cut a big piece of challah and he would chomp away until he had a full kazayas, which is the way that many poskim hold. On the other hand, Rab Zera was a little concerned about that because it would seem to be inappropriate. It's like a starving person is eating. It's just not good table manners to have a large chunk of challah and just sit there and eating it while everybody is, I could do the same thing perhaps. And the answer to his objection as well, it's in a certain sense, it might be considered covered Shabbos. To enjoy the meal a little bit more, perhaps. Now, there is a discussion about cutting the challah before you actually make hamotzi. You may have seen this, you may do it yourself, that many people, when they're waiting for everybody to come to the table, before they make hamotzi, will take the knife to make a little cut in the challah. So the reason for that is a halakha called hesach hadas, that you shouldn't have an interruption in your kavanah from washing and hamotzi. And that's why you should at least make a little indentation in the challah, but not, see, if you make a slice in the challah, then you're taking away from the shleimus of Lechem Mishnah. So you make an indentation, you don't actually slice the challah. Make a little indentation to indicate that you're preparing to do the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah and B'tzias Hapas. And again, all this has to do at a time when they didn't have sliced bread. And there are a lot of discussions about this. Now, if you actually cut into the loaf, then it's not Lechem Mishnah anymore. It's not a whole loaf. Do you always have to have a whole loaf or a whole challah when you make hamotzi? And is there a difference between the different seudos? So according to almost all poskim, Yeah, I said all poskim would agree that on Friday night and Shabbos afternoon, you have to have 2 whole challahs. Surah Shlishis, on the other hand, there is some discussion. Yes, man.
It's like we had today, we actually had things pull apart.
Right, it was pull apart.
Right, so as soon as you take off one piece from that pull apart, you now change that, can't use it like a Mishnah.
Well, that, yeah, because even though each one of those little pieces might be considered like a mini challah by itself, but it really isn't. The pull-apart challah is the equivalent of slicing a challah. So if you have an entire pull-apart challah, then you can't pull one piece apart.
So take off one piece.
If you take off one piece, then it is no longer a challah shlema. You've diminished it somehow, and that would be a problem. Most Rishonim were very, very makpid about Lechem Mishnah for Surah Shlishis as well. However, there are some. There's a machlokas in 2 different tshuvos of Maram Rutenberg, whether that's an absolute. There's also a discussion about Lechem Mishnah on Yontif. It's not quite the same as Shabbos, but we do paskin that you do have Lechem Mishnah on Yontif. We don't have a Surah Shlishis on Yontif because it's a different din of Oneg and Tovod. It's a separate discussion. There's also, you have one interesting shita of the Netziv. I think he's the only one that holds this way, that he would hold that you don't necessarily need Lechem Mishnah for Shalashudas. And there are others who disagree with him. The general practice is that we do, or there are some who say that Surah Shlishis does not require it. There's also a discussion as to whether or not is Lechem Mishnah a biblical mitzvah or only rabbinic. And again, the Taz, in his commentary on the Torah, says that Lechem Mishnah and having 3 meals on Shabbos is a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Magen Avram, he says that it's not that clear, and there are other poskim. Shvas Yaakov says it's also d'oraisa, and there are others, but many hold that would be b'derabbanan. Now, there are practical issues regarding Lechem Mishnah. Let's assume there's just 2 of you at home on Shabbos, or one, or you're by yourself. You're not going to eat 2 challahs. So you take out one challah or one challah roll, and you take out one from the freezer. Can you use a frozen roll or a frozen challah for Lechem Mishnah? Does it have to be edible? It's interesting. It's an interesting machlokas achronim. I mean, they didn't have freezers in the time of the Rishonim, but the Minchas Yitzchak Weiss, who died in 1989, he says that the frozen loaf can eventually be thawed out and eaten, so therefore it is considered edible even in its frozen state. So he would paskin that if you had to, you could use a frozen challah for Lechem Mishnah. The Shevet Levi, on the other hand, Shmuel Vosner says that no, it has to be edible at the time of the meal, and the potential doesn't matter. And also, according to many Rishonim, you have to actually cut both challahs. Now, we didn't talk about the slicing yet. I would say 95 or 98% of Jews in the world have Lechem Mishnah. They have 2 challahs. The Hasidim who follow the Zohar, some Hasidic Rebbes, had multiple challahs, 18 challahs, 36 challahs at every Seudah, based on the Zohar. And you don't see this too often today, but there are many great Hasidic Rebbe's who had a whole stack of challahs when they made them. Now, maybe that was because they gave out shirayim. I don't know. But this was based on the Zohar. Before Hasidus even existed, the Zohar mentions you have multiple challahs. What does it say? I have the exact quotation here someplace. Well, I can't find it right now. Here we are. Yeah, the Zohar. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Okay. The Zohar says that you have 12 loaves on Shabbos, and this he quotes the Zemer, that Askino Sudasa, which is an all Aramaic Zemer that we sing usually on Shalosh Shudas, and Shechinta Tesate B'Shis Nachme Listar. It talks about the 12 loaves. Others have more. I won't get into the Hasidic Torah on this, but many people, many Rebbes had multiple challahs on their table. So frozen challahs, in a pinch, you have who to rely on. Preferable not to use it frozen, at least thawed out partway. What about using cake for lechem mishnah? Is that acceptable? Now, all right. Okay. So here, let me put in a personal nishagas of my own, I guess you can call it. Many people make challahs with all types of additions. They chocolate chip challahs. There's cinnamon babka challahs. There's all kinds of things that people add to challahs. Adding onions or sesames. All right, that's fine. But once you start adding all this other sweet stuff, it's more like cake than challah. My daughter makes all these fancy challahs, and it's like eating babka. And there's a whole discussion about that. It's called pasa barbekistin. And now, if you have a large quantity of it, you would wash and bench. If somebody had a whole package of cookies, not just one or two, but you ate a whole box of cookies, you'd have to bench. Yeah.
I tell you something that happened to me. As my motto is what to do. As I'm getting older, right, I'm becoming a little forgetful.
Yes, we all are.
So, and one thing that I also learned is if you eat this experience, which I'll tell you in a minute, right, you have to make the bracha achrona immediately, because if you don't, it leads to a problem. I'll tell you what my problem was. I had a piece of cake, not a piece, a little piece of cake, and then I took a break, 20 minutes or a half an hour, and then I take out my sitter, and what do? Instead of turning to al-bichya, I turn to hamazon.
Okay.
And I start benching.
Okay.
I think you say, how can you do this? It's crazy. I get Hazanis Hakol. I said, oh my God, I didn't wash. I didn't have any bread. I just had a piece of cake. So what should I do now? Benching. Should I stop right now? Do I have to say out loud nothing now? Is the benching give me any coverage for the piece of cake that I had?
Okay.
What they told me, or my mom told me was, which I did, I stopped and I went back and I said out nothing. Because my question was, do I really have to do that? He said, you did the right thing.
But if you had a lot of cake.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I word up. Maybe if I had a lot of cake, I made a meal out of it, I could have continued with the benching and I would have been okay.
Okay. So the Mishnah Berurah raises this question, and it's fascinating how it comes out. Can you use cake for lechem mishnah if you had a loaf cake of some sort?
You forgot something.
So if you look in
That's tefillin. Look,
where is it?
I'm doing tefillin.
In Mishnah Berurah,
Take it, you can't miss.
in the Mishnah Berurah, Siman Reish Ayin Dalet.
Your heart is more important than your back. Look how bent that is.
We can hear everybody.
All right, they're all, on the issue of whether you could use cake for Lechem Mishnah, so the Mishnah Berurah says, in Reish Ayin Daled, he says, if you, he refers you to the discussion on this topic in Siman 168. Only problem is, this discussion does not appear in our editions of the Mishnah Berurah. One of those types of things. Maybe in an earlier edition it existed. Maybe somebody took it out because they were too frum. I don't know. But he refers you to the discussion. He just doesn't answer. The Rifnei Zalman, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, seems to indicate that you could use pasa barbekista, you could use cake for Lechem Mishnah in all circumstances. That's the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Again, if you're a Chabad Chassid, then maybe you could follow that. Otherwise, we generally do not use cake for Lechem Mishnah. It's in all circumstances, for both. Yeah. Now you got to eat a lot of cake. So if you have two birthday cakes, two big birthday cakes, perhaps without the frosting, you can, according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, you can use that for Lechem Mishnah.
But you have like one challah and one cake, that would be okay according to that.
Yeah, again, normatively, we do not accept this as psak. And given the fact that the Mishnah Berurah discussion on it doesn't exist, or we don't have it, clearly, I would say the abundance of poskim would say, no, you can't use cake. Now, if you're stuck, what if you're stuck?
Well, what about pizza? What about pizza? If you have a pizza
put out-
pie or something.
I'll go, it's a good question. Pizza, according to Rov poskim, you would make hamotzi on, and a pizza theoretically could be used for Lechem Mishnah, although that might make your meal milchik. Which is a whole separate discussion in terms of, bus over dugim.
Shavuos. The thing of
should you have a-
Shavuos, Wally.
Did you have a
Shavuos.
milked meal for Shabbos? That's a separate topic for discussion. But if you had, you can make Lechem Mishnah on two pizzas theoretically. That would not be a problem. Again,
Wally?
yes, question.
Yeah, Wally, some of these challahs that you can get, chocolate chips, cinnamon, all these stuff.
Right.
Some of these challahs are bordering, that taste like cake to me.
Yes, I mentioned that to me, that's a babka. That's not a challah. I agree with you. I agree with you. And that's why personally, I would prefer not to have, these chocolate chip or cinnamon raisin challahs and all these fancy ones, because that's more like cake than challah. I agree with you. But given the fact that it's still a challah, and given the fact that there is a discussion that some people hold, you could use a large enough quantity of cake theoretically, so that you would still make hamotzi on, although I personally have my doubts whether it's these chocolate chip or cinnamon or the other fancy challahs qualify as cake or bread. I personally have my doubts about that. But Lechem Mishnah clearly is a requirement for all three meals. There are some who would say chalashudas might be an exception. When you make an indentation, it should be an indentation in the challah before you make hamotzi, not a slice. Because if you actually cut into that challah before you make hamotzi, that it would make it deficient, and it wouldn't be a full challah. And the only reason you do that is to show your intention of having kavanah, and that this is why. If you have a lot of company, it is probably preferable for every person at that table to have their own Lechem Mishnah. Because if you have to wait for everybody to sit down, it's a Hesach Hadas. To wait till everybody to wash, and it's a long, and the Netilas Yadayim is a Hechsher mitzvah. It's preparatory, it's part of Hamotzi. which is why you can't talk in between washing and hamotzi. And you have to wait a very, very long time. And we know this happens when you have a lot of company at the table. Halakhically, it's questionable whether it's appropriate. Now, again, it's very nice that one person makes a hamotzi and gives out to everybody else. But the question is, what happens until you make that hamotzi and people are sitting at the table waiting for everybody to finish washing? Then you have the issue of Hesach Hadas. Their mind has not focused on the connection between washing and hamotzi. So if you're having if you have 3 or 4 people, that's one thing. But if you're having 10 people at the table, it's in all probability more appropriate to everybody to have little roles and to tell people, don't wait, make hamotzi when you come in. That would be a preferred way to do it. But there's a lot of halachos here with the simple mitzvah of lechem mishnah. The same halachos of Ayin Yontif as well. Yeah.
Is that why the Yankees went ahead and basically wash before making kiddush and then making hamotzi?
Okay, so, well, the German minhag actually follows the Ramah. And the Ramah is our posek for Ashkenazic Jewry, and this is one of those cases that we don't follow the Ramah, and we follow the Machaber. The Ramah suggests that we wash before Kiddush, because it's all, one continuum. The Tilas Yadayim, and then Kiddush, and then Hamotzi, and Hamotzi comes right after Kiddush. So you avoid, if you do it, now again,
It's still an issue. You wash, there are 45 people there, and there's 10 minutes between the time you wash and you make it.
well, this is why, if each person has their own lechem mishnah, you avoid that problem that way also. So-
I've never seen this done in a group setting.
Yeah.
But the only time I've seen people wash before Kiddush is with a few families invited, just a handful of people.
Well,
That's an issue.
I remember when I used to go to my in-laws in Greene for sukkahs, and the sukkah was in the backyard, and you had to go in and out of the house each time. We all washed before Kiddush to avoid going back and forth, because that would take more time. Everybody washed beforehand. And again, the Germans do this all the time. Other people do it very often on sukkahs to avoid the issue of having to go back and forth. But it's one of those strange cases where the Ashkenazim do not follow the Ramah. This is the Ramah suggestion. But again, as Danny points out, you have the same issue of Hesach Hadas, because you have to wait for everybody to come in, then you defeated your purpose. But so that would require everybody to make their own Kiddush as well.
Right, that's what I'm saying. On the other hand, I think even though we generally don't practice, I think it makes sense. To wash before Kiddush.
It certainly makes sense. It's one continuum, and the only problem is when you have a lot of company, then the waiting is problematic. So, and if they do that with company, each person would have to make their own Kiddush as well to avoid the problem of potential Hesach Hadas, because most people have difficulty focusing in general, and focusing on a mitzvah, to keep your mind focused on the mitzvah. When you wash and you go inside and you're waiting for 10 other people to wash, to sit there and say, I'm focusing on the mitzvah of Kiddush and Hamotzi, and nothing else extraneous will enter my mind. That's tough. People can't really do that. Yes, Dave.
What is the procedure if you wash before Kiddush? You wash and then you don't make a motzi?
No, you do. You wash, you make Kiddush, and then you go right to Motzi. Just don't talk in between each part.
So you make Kiddush, you wash,
And then right
and then you make a motzi and eat the bread.
Yes, you make Kiddush, you drink your wine, and then you make Hamotzi.
So there's no, the possibility of after you've washed, that you are not thinking about the motzi when it's an interruption of, say, the Kiddush.
No, it's not an interruption. It's all part of one continuum of one mitzvah. Now, again, once you're used to doing this, then there's less of a problem of talking or interruptions in between. If this is your minhag to do it, then everybody does it together, and you wash, you make Kiddush, and then you sit down and make a motzi. And if you're used to doing it, you do it the right way. The challenge comes when you do this just on sukkahs to avoid going back and forth to the kitchen to wash, unless you have a sink in the sukkah or next to the sukkah. Again, the Germans have picked up this minhag, and again, it's one of those rare situations. There are a few where you have the Shulchan Aruch, which is written primarily from a Sephardic perspective, and then you have the Ramah's commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. The word Shulchan Aruch means the set table. The parish of the Ramah is called the Mappa, the tablecloth. So he covers all the differences between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. And we normally follow the Ramah, where he indicates where our minhag is different from the Sephardic minhag. This is one of those occasions where we follow the Sephardic minhag, not the Ashkenazic minhag. And the other interesting one, and I won't go, this is a whole separate shiur all by itself, all the times where we reverse who we follow, the whole mitzvah of glatt kosher is a Sephardic practice, which Ashkenazim have adopted. It's a crazy mix-up. In any event, keep all this in mind this Shabbos when you make Lechem Mishnah, and hopefully it'll add to your understanding of this particular mitzvah. It's all based on the mun. Okay, any other questions? Good. Okay. Have a great day and stay warm.
Shut this off.